10 questions about the Provocator, a type of gladiator in ancient Rome. Salvete! My name is Demetrios, I'm a historical reenactor and gladiator myself. I display a Provocator when I fight as a gladiator, and here are 10 questions that I am going to answer regarding the Provocator as a gladiator. Question number 1. What exactly is a Provocator? The Provocator is one of many gladiatorial classes that existed during the gladiatorial culture, about 600 to 700 years, depending on who you ask. So the Provocator is a very distinctive gladiatorial class or gladiatorial type that was different from all the other classes or types that existed. But that's not something unusual because every gladiatorial type was different than the other ones. So we had, for example, the Murmillo, the Secutor, the Retiarius and the Provocator, just to name a few, and they were all different regarding their equipment, their combat stances, their combat styles, and their enemies, which they fought. So to sum it up, the Provocator is one of many types of gladiators that existed during the Roman era. Question number 2. Why is he called Provocator? Provocator in English would mean the challenger. It comes from the Latin word provocare, which means to provoke, and that was one of the things the Provocator did. He provoked. How did he do it? There are different types to provoke your opponent. For example, lifting your shield and showing weak spots, to get your enemy to attack you and then counter-attack. That's one of the ways we can do it. I, for example, like to open up my defenses and bash my sword against my pectorale, my breastplate, to get my enemy to attack me, because if I can anger him a little bit, he often loses his defenses or his defenses get weakened, and I can strike at weak spots of his equipment or of his armament and then maybe score a point. And that's the goal. I want to score points as well as he wants to score points, and points are scored when I hit flesh. Question number 3. How is the Provocator different from other gladiators? There are a few things that are different from, let's say, a Murmillo. The Provocator has a helmet that looks like a legionary helmet. It's like an evolution of a legionary helmet with a visor in front. But the whole construction of the galea, Latin for helmet, is pretty similar to the legionary helmet. You have a metal bar right here to stop incoming blows from top, and in the back you have a big piece of metal that protects your shoulder and your neck. Also, the Provocator is one of the few classes that had a chest protection called cardiophylax or pectorale. Question number 4. What equipment does a Provocator wear? The equipment of the Provocator was very, let's call it, basic. You had, as I said, a helmet, you had the pectorale, you had a protection for the sword arm called manica. This could be made of stuffed linen or stuffed fabric, it could be made of leather, and in some occasions it could have been metal plates, like the manica we know from Roman legionaries. But all the iconography we see, for example, reliefs, mosaics, vases, oil lamps, show armament pieces for the arm that look like it would have been fabric. You have a balteus, which is a belt. You have the subligaculum, which is a type of loincloth. You have a tibiale. We have to say that tibiale is not a Latin word for the padded shin guard, but we call it tibiale. And over that you had the ocrea, which is a greave made out of metal. I use, for example, greaves made out of bronze or brass, like this one. This is now one for the thrax. It's way higher than the shin guard I use, or the greave I use for my Provocator kit. And you wear that on the left leg, because the left leg is the forward-facing leg. You have a shield, a scutum. It's not as big as the scutum of a Murmillo, but it's bigger than a, for example, parmula from the Thrax. So it's a middle-sized shield, let's call it. Then you use a gladius, a sica, a pugio, however you want to call it, like this one. This is a replica from Pompeii. It's 36 centimeters in total length. It's pretty short for a sword, but this is very important for gladiatorial combat. Then usually gladiators, and the Provocator is no exception, would fight barefoot in the sense of the arena. We use shoes like caligae, because the surfaces we fight on are not made for barefoot combat and we don't want to destroy our foot. And then the Provocator has some ornament pieces. There is one piece in particular called the coda, or we call it coda, which is a leather or fabric tail that hangs around in the back and moves along with your movements during combat. On some funerary gravestones we see Provocatores with tibiale, with padded leg protections up to the thigh. So not only the lower leg, but the whole left leg was covered. And it depends on the era where these Provocatores fought or lived. Question number 5. Why does a Provocator has a chest protector? Well, that's a question that is not that easy to answer because we simply don't know. Some say the chest protection of the Provocator, the pectorale or the cardiophylax, were similar to the ones used by Mediterranean soldiers in the early days of the Republic, for example. It was an inexpensive piece of armament that protected your heart. So if your heart and parts of your lungs are protected, you are already well protected against stabs in that region, so you don't die that fast. We think that in addition or in combination to a rather smaller shield compared to the shield of a murmillo, the protection of the chest gives more defense and changes the combat style a bit, because you can't just stab right through if the shield is moved a little bit out of the way. So you have to go around that pectorale to at least score a point. But in the end, we don't actually know. We think that it is because of the similarity to early Roman soldiers, like for example the princeps or the hastatus. Question number 6. What is the so-called coda used for? The coda is an ornamental piece that is, as far as I know, only known by Provocatores. Why is this important? If you take two Provocatores and put them against each other and they start fighting, they don't move around that much. They move around each other, but they don't go out of the striking distance very often. They are very close to each other. So the movements are like a circle around each other, always facing the other fighter. So if they turn, like they make a sidestep and both combatants turn, the coda dangles around, making it look like a dance, like the coda is some sort of tail of an animal of prey, for example, like a lion or like a jaguar or something, giving the fighters more stability. And we use it because it just looks good, in our opinion at least. It moves around quite beautifully and it gives the fighter a bit more of an aesthetic look. And that's the reason. The actual reason why, we don't know. There is no written source about the coda. We have some mosaics and some reliefs showing the coda as an armament piece of the Provocator, but we simply don't know why he has it. Question number 7. Who does a Provocator usually fight against? The Provocator usually fights another Provocator. It's a symmetrical class, meaning the opponent had the same equipment as the Provocator fighting him. The only differences were style choices, like what type of fabric was used, what colors were used, what metal or what type of metal was used. But all in all, the equipment was the same. So the Provocator is a symmetrical class predominantly fighting another Provocator. There is an instance we know about, it's a relief where we see a Provocator fighting a murmillo, but that was very rare. I also read about an occasion where you saw a provocator fighting a thrax. But most of the times, I would say 99% of fights were provocator against provocator. Question number 8. What was the typical fighting style of a provocator? From experimental archaeology, we try to recreate the combat of a provocator. We actually don't have any manuscripts or any written sources on how gladiatorial combat looked like. The only thing we have are frescoes, mosaics, surviving armament pieces, for example, from Pompeii, and with them we try to recreate what was logically possible using those pieces of armament. For example, this is a gladius or a sica or a pugio that is designed after an original find from Pompeii. It's 36 centimeters in length, meaning you don't have that much reach when attacking your opponent. So what is possible with that? Possible is to try to get as close as possible to my opponent while still defending my open parts of the body, because you want to hit flesh to score points, and then try to hit my opponent where he doesn't wear any armor. From the scutum we have two types of scuta we use. We have one that has a center grip, that's a more defensive combat style, and we have one that has a grip on the lower third of the scutum and a leather strap that is strapped around my elbow. So that shield is way more offensive and I can shield bash very, very easily with that. I use this to find out if I am in striking distance, because if you consider that you have a helmet on with a full visor and only two open eye sockets, let's call openings for the eye, the perception of distance is very different. So I want to see if I am near enough to strike. So I lightly bash my opponent's shield, and while doing that I move a bit forward and then try to attack. There are 4 basic strikes we do. There is the upper strike, trying to hit the shoulder or the upper back. There is the middle strike, trying to hit the side of an opponent. There is the middle inner strike, the same for the other side, and there is the under or lower hit for the thigh or for the parts of the forward-facing leg that are not protected. With a small shield it is fairly simple to hit the leg. Against a murmillo with a very large shield it is very difficult. The only attack you can do there is basically the upper attack and trying to get around the shield, which isn't that easy with a short blade. The provocator fighting style therefore was very dependent on skill and technique. You try to provoke the opponent to attack and you try to block the attack to then retaliate. That's the whole goal. You could also try to bash as much as possible. Problem there is that you will lose extremely fast energy and that would result in your opponent defeating you, because you can't fight forever. My longest combat was about 4 to 5 minutes, and that's tops. Question number 9. Were there any famous provocatores we know about? There is one gravestone I have in mind, and if I'm correct, it's the gravestone of the gladiator Diodorus. It was the combat between Diodorus and Demetrius, which is funny because my gladiatorial name is Demetrios. And it's written on that gravestone that Diodorus died because the Summa Rudis, which is the referee of gladiatorial combats, made a mistake. And when Diodorus actually had won the fight against Demetrius, he let Demetrius stand up, continue the fight, and then Diodorus lost his life because of that. That's written on the gravestone. So these are the 2 more famous provocatores I know about. Maybe there are more, but there aren't that many gladiators which we know about. There are a handful of gladiators with names that we know about. I don't know if the Diodorus and the Demetrius were famous at their time, but they are two Provocatores we know today of, that they existed. And question number 10. How accurate are the portrayals of Provocatores in modern times, for example, reenactment or games? In games, I haven't encountered that many Provocatores. I think in Total War Rome, the first game, there is the possibility, if you play as a Roman faction, to produce Provocatores, and I think they look pretty good. Actually, they have like the breast protection, they have a manica, they have a greave, a shield, a sword and a helmet. In all other games I know of, the Provocator doesn't exist. There is mostly something, or most often there's a mix of gladiatorial types. For honor, for example, you have a fighter, the Gladiator, I think it's called the Gladiator, who is a mix of three classes. He has the trident from the Retiarius, for example. He has a small shield and two greaves, like the Hoplomachus. He is using a Provocator helmet, but he has other equipment pieces that it's a mix of different classes. So in games there isn't that much portrayal of the Provocator. In reenactment, on the other hand, there are very, very good portrayals of Provocatores, because in reenactment often the people take reliefs or mosaics, oil lamps or any iconography they can find and try to recreate what's displayed there. So they take, for example, the pectorale you see on different frescoes or on different, not frescoes, reliefs, and they imitate that. Or they take the leg protection they see on some mosaics and do that. Or they take what actually still exists, for example, from the finds of Pompeii. We see that there is a Provocator helmet, there is an existing greave of a Provocator and, for example, the sword. So the reenactment community is portraying it very, very good, I'd say. I haven't seen that many Provocatores where I would say that's completely off, because, as I said, style choices are style choices. If you have the equipment that usually is considered to be the equipment of a Provocator, and you just recreate it in your own style. For example, I have a pectorale using squame scales because I simply like scales. It's not that far off, because we know from legionaries that they used, for example, lorica squamata. Therefore, that's not illogical. We don't have any iconography showing it. We have iconography showing plates that had scales chiseled in it. So there are depictions where scales were used, but we don't know if that were actual scales or maybe it was leather that was hammered or formed to look like if it was made out of scales. But all in all, Provocatores I see always have the same equipment. One greave and one padding for the left leg, a fairly large but not that large shield, a sword, the typical helmet of a Provocator, a chest protection, some sort of chest protection, the belt, the subligaculum, some sort of coda. It's always a style choice if you do or not. Important is if one of the both Provocatores uses the coda, the other has to use the coda as well. You don't have one Provocator using it and the other not. It's always the same, because it's a symmetrical class. So these were the 10 questions for the Provocator. I hope you liked it. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them down in the comment section so I can answer them to my best abilities. I hope you liked it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and maybe we see us in the next 10 questions about gladiators. I think it will be the Murmillo next time. Well, until then, have a nice day. Valete!